I opened the file expecting a legend. Instead, I found a word on a map. Tartary. No empire, no conspiracy, just ink. So when did a cartographic label become a lost civilization? Tonight, we follow the first trace in the record. Like, subscribe, and drop your theory below. Type Tartaria into any search bar. The story appears instantly. A global empire, advanced technology, architecture beyond its time, a civilization erased from textbooks. That is the claim. The narrative is consistent. Tartaria ruled vast territories across Eurasia and beyond. It possessed energy systems we no longer understand. Its buildings still stand, rebranded as something else. Then, sometime in the 19th century, the empire was dismantled, its memory suppressed, its name removed. That is how the myth is told today. I pulled the thread from the present, not the past. I watched the most shared videos. I noted the repeated phrases. Hidden empire, mud flood, stolen history. The same images appear again and again. Old maps, grand domes, exhibition buildings, oversized doorways. A pattern forms. But here is the first question. Who first combined those pieces into a single empire? Because the word Tartary is older than the narrative, much older. It appears on European maps centuries before YouTube, on atlases printed in the 1700s, on encyclopedias in the 1800s. But in those sources, what does it mean? The modern claim says it means an organized, unified, advanced global state, a rival to Rome, a forgotten superpower. So I checked the record. In 18th century cartography, Tartary is often a broad geographic label, a loose term applied by European mapmakers to vast regions of Central and Northern Asia. Not a nation-state in the modern sense, not a centralized empire with a single capital, more a placeholder than a polity. But the internet version does not start there. It starts with suspicion. It asks, if the word was on maps, why was it removed? If it was just geography, why does it sound imperial? Why do some maps label Great Tartary? This is where the record shifts, because Great Tartary does appear on maps. That is factual. The label exists, printed, engraved, distributed. The question is not whether the word was used. It was. The question is how it was understood at the time. I traced modern references backward. Many recent videos cite 18th and 19th century maps as proof, but they rarely quote the accompanying texts. They show the image. They circle the word. They let the silence do the work. Silence is powerful in narrative. If a map says Great Tartary and nothing else is explained, the imagination fills the gap. Empire, uniform culture, unified rule. But historical cartography was not always precise. Regions were named broadly. Borders were speculative. Information traveled slowly. So, the claim stands on an implication. A name equals a nation. A label equals a state. But who first made that leap? I searched early online forums from the mid-2000s, archived posts, message boards, scattered discussions. At first, Tartary appears in historical debates about Mongols in Central Asia. Then, gradually, the tone changes. The word begins to pair with phrases like suppressed history and erased civilization. The pattern intensifies after 2010. Visual platforms amplify it. Images detach from context. A World's Fair building becomes Tartarian architecture. A map becomes proof of empire. The narrative solidifies. Yet I kept looking for the origin point. the first clear articulation of Tartaria as a technologically advanced lost global empire intentionally hidden from modern textbooks. Not the maps, not the atlases, the reinterpretation. The record does not show a single inventor, no manifesto, no founding document. Instead, it shows accumulation, posts referencing posts, videos citing earlier videos, a feedback loop. That matters, because when people ask who invented Tartaria, they often mean the empire narrative, not the cartographic term. The geographic label was not invented recently, but the lost empire storyline is modern. And here is the tension. If Tartary was once a real term used in historical geography, and if the modern myth reframes that term into something else, then the origin we are searching for is not in the 1700s. It is in the reinterpretation. So the file splits in two. One folder, documented historical usage of Tartary. Another folder, the modern narrative of a hidden empire. They are not identical. In the next section, I go back to the earliest printed sources, not screenshots, not commentary, the actual atlases and encyclopedias, what they said, what they did not say, and whether the empire claim appears anywhere in their text, because somewhere between ink on paper and pixels on screen, the meaning changed. I left the internet and went to paper, not screenshots, not cropped images, actual scans of 18th and 19th century atlases, library catalogs, digital archives from European collections. I searched for the word as it was printed: Tartary, Tartaria, Grande Tartary, Grossa Tartare. The term appears often, but not in the way the modern narrative suggests. In French maps from the 1700s, Grande Tartary covers immense territories across Siberia and Central Asia. On British maps, Great Tartary stretches east of Muscovy. German cartographers use similar labels. The word is there, clearly engraved, publicly circulated. But the context matters. In these atlases, Tartary functions as a geographic umbrella, a broad designation for lands inhabited by various nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples, Tatars, Mongols, Turkic groups. It is not presented as a single centralized state with unified governance. It is a cartographic shorthand. I checked accompanying texts. Encyclopedias from the late 18th century describe Tartary as a vast region, often divided into subdivisions: Chinese Tartary, independent Tartary, Russian Tartary. The language is descriptive, sometimes vague, but not conspiratorial. No mention of suppressed technology, no reference to a fallen superpower. That silence is important. Because if a global empire had collapsed in the 1800s, contemporary sources would reflect political disruption, diplomatic shifts, military conflict, administrative collapse. Instead, what we see in the record is gradual cartographic refinement. As Russian imperial borders expanded eastward, map labels changed. Tartary slowly disappears, replaced by more specific territorial names: Siberia, Central Asia, named governorates. The shift aligns with political consolidation and improved geographic knowledge. This is not erasure, it is specification. Early modern European cartography often relied on second-hand reports. Large unknown areas were grouped under generalized names. Africa had similar treatment. So did the American interior in earlier centuries. As information improved, broad labels dissolved. The record shows evolution, not deletion. I searched for any 18th or 19th century source describing Tartary as a unified technological civilization. I found none. No archival document frames Tartary as a hidden advanced society destroyed in a single cataclysm. No museum catalog lists Tartarian Empire artifacts. No diplomatic archive references a treaty with a centralized Tartarian state. Instead, I found diversity. Travel accounts describe multiple khanates, regional powers, fluid alliances, distinct cultures, not a monolith. The modern narrative often points to phrases like Great Tartary as proof of scale. But great in cartographic language frequently meant large region, not great power. Greenland was labeled great in older contexts. So were other expansive territories. The adjective does not imply centralized sovereignty. I pulled up high-resolution scans of a 1771 British atlas. The typography is careful. Borders are faint and sometimes speculative. Great Tartary occupies space east of the Ural Mountains. Yet no capital is marked as imperial center. No coat of arms signals unified authority. The map shows rivers, mountains, approximate boundaries, geography first. The word Tartaria appears less frequently than Tartary. In Latinized contexts, it is a variation, a linguistic shift, not a political statement. Language changed across editions and translations. Here is where the narrative gap widens. The modern myth reads historical ambiguity as evidence of concealment. But ambiguity in early cartography was common. Unknown regions were approximated. Names were imprecise. Borders were elastic. So I looked for rupture. Did the word vanish suddenly? Did a decree remove it from textbooks? The transition appears gradual across decades. Editions update terminology as political realities shift. Russian expansion, Qing administration in Inner Asia, colonial mapping practices. The label fades as categories refine. The record does not show a purge. It shows administrative absorption and improved classification. That does not mean every question is settled. Historical terminology can obscure as much as it reveals. European mapmakers often misunderstood distant regions. They generalized. They imposed exonyms. Tartary itself derives from external naming practices, not self-identification by all groups within the region. But that is different from an erased empire. So the first trace in print tells us this: the word existed, widely, publicly, for centuries, as geography. What it does not show, at least in the primary sources I examined, is a narrative of a technologically advanced global state dismantled in secret. The transformation from geographic label to lost civilization does not originate in the 1700s record. It begins later, and in the next part, I trace when that reinterpretation accelerates, when scattered speculation hardens into a repeatable storyline. The archive goes quiet in the 19th century. The word fades from maps. Then nothing dramatic happens. No public collapse. No global war labeled Tartarian. Just administrative renaming and territorial consolidation. Then, more than a century later, the word returns. Not in academic journals, not in newly discovered archives. It reappears in digital spaces, early 2000s forums, fragmented discussions, threads about old maps, questions about architectural style, posts asking why certain buildings look too advanced for their era. At first, the references are loose. Someone posts a scan of an 18th century atlas. Another user notes the phrase, Great Tartary. A third asks why textbooks never mention it. The conversation is speculative, not structured. There is no unified theory yet, just curiosity. This is the first pattern: curiosity without cohesion. Around the late 2000s, the tone shifts. The map is no longer just a curiosity. It becomes a hinge. The label is framed as suppressed. The absence of the word in modern geography is described as suspicious. The record changes here. Video platforms accelerate the process. Visual evidence travels faster than context. A screenshot of a map circulates without the surrounding page. A cropped image of Great Tartary appears next to a photograph of an ornate 19th century building. The juxtaposition implies continuity. No citation connects them. The viewer connects them. I trace some of the earliest widely shared videos discussing Tartaria as a lost empire. Many cite each other. Few cite primary sources directly. The maps are shown. The atlases are mentioned. But the accompanying explanatory texts from those atlases are rarely read aloud. This is the second pattern: image over text. By the early 2000s, the narrative expands. It absorbs other online theories: mud flood, orphan trains, reset. Architectural anomalies are folded into the storyline. Exhibition buildings from the 1890s are reframed as remnants of Tartarian technology. Demolitions become evidence of erasure. The empire gains attributes retroactively. I checked timestamps. Blog posts from the late 2000s mention Tartary in isolation. By the mid-2000s, it is embedded within a larger alternative history ecosystem. The term stabilizes. Tartaria replaces Tartary more often. The spelling feels more imperial, more Latin, more formal. Language matters. The shift from Tartary to Tartaria in modern usage is subtle but consistent. Historical maps overwhelmingly use Tartary. The online narrative prefers Tartaria. The extra syllable gives weight. It sounds like Rome, like Britannia, like a state. I searched for a single originating document, a manifesto. A first viral post declaring Tartaria was a hidden global empire erased in the 19th century. The archive does not offer one. Instead, it shows accumulation. Posts cite earlier posts. Videos reference previous videos. Comment sections reinforce interpretation. Over time, repetition creates authority. The claim becomes self-referential. Evidence loops back to itself. This is the third pattern: feedback without external verification. When I map the timeline, a cluster appears between roughly 2013 and 2018. The volume of content increases sharply. Image boards, video essays, compilations of proof. The narrative becomes more detailed. Dates are proposed. Motives are assigned. The 19th century becomes the focal point of the alleged reset. Yet, the primary sources cited remain the same: 18th and 19th century maps labeled Tartary. The gap between source and conclusion widens. The maps show geography. The narrative infers empire. The inference becomes storyline. The storyline becomes community identity. And once identity forms, questioning the interpretation feels like opposition. But the record remains accessible. I revisited the atlases. I cross-checked editions. The wording does not change retroactively. The maps do not describe advanced energy systems. They do not outline centralized governance under a single Tartarian crown. The reinterpretation happens outside the historical documents. It happens in commentary. This does not mean curiosity is illegitimate. Historical terminology is complex. Cartographic language can obscure power structures. But the leap from broad regional label to suppressed technological superpower is not present in the 18th or 19th century text. It is constructed later. The pattern is clear now. Step 1. Rediscover an old term. Step 2. Highlight its disappearance. Step 3. Interpret disappearance as concealment. Step 4. Attach architectural and technological anomalies to the name. Step 5. Repeat until it feels historical. No single inventor appears. No founding theorist stands at the beginning of the line. The narrative emerges collectively, shaped by platform dynamics and visual amplification. The myth's origin is not a person, it is a process, and that process leaves a traceable digital footprint. In the final part, I separate what survives when we strip away commentary, what remains supported by documented evidence, what remains interpretation, and where the silence in the archive is real, not imagined. So what survives the record? Strip away the thumbnails, remove the dramatic music, set aside the comment threads. What remains when we look only at documented sources? First, the word Tartary was real. It appears consistently in European maps and texts from roughly the 16th through the 19th centuries. It functioned as a broad geographic label. It described regions across Central and Northern Asia. That is supported by printed atlases, encyclopedias, and travel accounts. Second, the label gradually disappeared from common cartographic use. As imperial borders sharpened and geographic knowledge expanded, Tartary was replaced by more specific territorial names: Siberia, Central Asia, Mongolia, named provinces. That shift aligns with political consolidation and improved mapping standards. Those 2 points are stable. Now the tension. The modern Tartaria narrative asserts more. It asserts centralized governance, advanced technology, a coordinated global presence, a deliberate historical reset in the 19th century. I searched for direct primary documentation supporting those claims. Treaties signed by a unified Tartarian authority, administrative records from a centralized capital, contemporary diplomatic correspondence describing the fall of a global Tartarian state. I did not find them. That absence does not automatically invalidate every question. Archives are incomplete. Power structures can obscure. Empires can be renamed. But the burden shifts when extraordinary claims require extraordinary documentation. The record shows multiple khanates, regional powers, complex interactions between Russian expansion, Qing administration, and local polities. It does not show a single, unified, technologically advanced super empire erased in one coordinated event. So, where does the modern narrative draw its force? From ambiguity. Early maps were imprecise. Borders were approximate. Terminology was fluid. That ambiguity creates space for reinterpretation. When viewers encounter Great Tartary without context, the phrase feels monumental. It invites scale. But scale is not structure. The adjective great often denoted size, not sovereignty. Historical naming conventions were inconsistent. India once covered vast, poorly defined territories. Ethiopia appeared in early maps in ways that do not match modern borders. Cartography evolved through correction. The silence in the 19th century record regarding a catastrophic Tartarian collapse is notable. If a technologically advanced global empire had fallen in a coordinated reset, we would expect ripple effects in trade records, diplomatic archives, military correspondence. Instead, we observe incremental change, renaming, administrative absorption, border refinement. The absence of rupture matters. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge why the myth persists. Architectural grandeur from the 19th century can feel out of place to modern observers. World's fairs produced monumental temporary structures. Rapid industrialization compressed visible change into decades. When historical literacy is uneven, acceleration feels suspicious. The narrative offers coherence. It binds maps, buildings, and terminology into a single storyline. Humans prefer unified explanations over fragmented history, but preference is not proof. When I pulled the thread back to the beginning, I did not find a hidden empire in the 1700s record. I found a word used broadly. When I traced the modern narrative, I did not find a single inventor. I found accumulation in digital space, repetition, amplification. So, who first invented Tartaria as a lost empire? Not an 18th century cartographer, not a 19th century diplomat. The empire narrative emerges in the early 21st century, shaped by online reinterpretation of historical terminology. The myth has no singular author, it has contributors. And that is the final pattern. A historical label, a disappearance explained by refinement, a rediscovery framed as concealment, a digital ecosystem that rewards synthesis and spectacle. The record does not show ghosts. It shows paperwork, ink, additions, posts, upload dates. That does not mean every historical question about Central Asia is resolved. It means that the leap from geographic term to erased supercivilization is not documented in primary sources from the period it claims to describe. The silence is not proof of erasure. It is, so far, a silence in support. If new documents surface, the file can reopen. Archives are living systems. But until then, what survives is clear. Tartary was a cartographic term. Tartaria, as a hidden global empire narrative, is modern. The myth's origin is traceable, not to a secret decree, not to a burned archive, but to reinterpretation. We are not here for ghosts. We are here for the record.